series of topics from, national service to democracy to economic justice to climate change, largely to talk about where we as a country go together moving forward. And Pete will be leading these conversations. So we're very excited for you to join our very first conversation, which will be on national service. As many of you may know, this was our first policy we put out actually as part of the campaign, and it was a very important one to Pete, but also to all of us, because this was one way of thinking about how to bring the country together and making sure we had a common experience. So and I am honored to be here and to be as part of this conversation because it's such an important topic in my heart. It's what I led when I was at the White House in the Obama administration. So super excited to be administration. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my former boss, Pete Buttigieg, and have him sort of to kick us off, and then we'll go to Senator Coons and then start the conversation, which will also include Moran.
Great. Well, Sonal, thanks for getting us started, and thanks for your fantastic work then and now. And thanks so much to our guests who you'll hear from in a moment. And thanks everybody for joining. It's really exciting to be with you. As Sonal mentioned, this is the beginning of a series where I'm really looking forward to having substantive conversations about some of the issue areas and themes and opportunities that have really galvanized and animated our Win the Era community, and some of the themes that we talked about during the time that I was running for president as well. It's nice to be shifting gears a little bit. We've had a lot of fundraisers and a lot of get out the vote rallies. We're not done yet for the year. There's some other things we're going to have to do, but it's nice to be in a different mode as we think about some of the opportunities that are going to be before us. Look, nothing's going to be easy in Washington or across the country next year, but instead of just trying to prevent bad outcomes all the time, we're in a position as a country to begin looking to the future again. And that means being proactive and energetic about some of the policy possibilities that would make American life better. And one of the things that, as you know, I am passionate about is the opportunity for a greater access to national service until it becomes a kind of a norm in our country, both in terms of the work that can be done and in terms of the opportunity to get to know each other better and stitch our social fabric back together through that experience. And I'm really excited for the guests who are joining us tonight because they've been so active and so effective on that. So I don't want to prolong my monologue any more than that. Let me turn it over to somebody who is really the leading voice in the United States Senate on the possibilities for national service, my friend, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware.
Well, thank you, Pete. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sonal and Moran. Thank you to the both Service Year Alliance folks and the Win the Era folks. And Pete, thank you for your persistent, engaged, and effective leadership on service. You're both a personal role model to me of what service can mean. And as we talked about at the very beginning of your campaign for the presidency, you wove national service into your platform. In fact, I'll confess to this group, I think I maybe had a little more success in working with you and talking with you about service than our president-elect, who ultimately did make it an important part of his platform and is carrying it forward. But bluntly, just from the very beginning in your heart, you understood how national service can bring us together as a country, can deliver a new pathway towards opportunity for affordable higher education, and can give a new generation of Americans a chance to make a difference in their community and to learn skills and get experience. I've been someone whose life has been touched and in some ways shaped by national service. I launched and ran one of the very first National Direct AmeriCorps programs back in the mid-90s with the National Live a Dream Foundation. We had 150 members in 15 cities, and it was a program that I largely wrote and drove with a few friends. I'd never done anything like it. And this was in the very first days of the Corporation for National Community Service, when we were sort of building the plane as we were flying it. Several years later, I became a commissioner here in the state of Delaware and helped Delaware launch its own service learning programs, its own Senior Corps and AmeriCorps programs. Actually met my wife through that. She was a commissioner along with me. And then when I was county executive, a role very similar to mayor, I helped launch and run a program with our volunteer fire service here in Delaware, one of the real linchpins of volunteerism and service in my community where the fire service, except for the city of Wilmington, is all volunteer. I'm convinced that national service can have a transformative impact on millions of lives if we would but make real the promise that was legislated into statute in the Edward M. Kennedy National Service Act, our nation's monument to late Senator Ted Kennedy. We've never gotten close to the authorized strength for that. And the CORE Act, which is a bipartisan bill that Corey in my office and many others have worked with me on. Ultimately, we've gotten 18 senators, an equal number, Republican and Democrat, to commit to dramatically expanding national service by 600,000 positions over 3 years. And so I look forward to talking about that. I am hopeful that we can act on the recommendations of a recently completed commission on service that looked at military and civilian service and ways to make it, as you put it, Mayor Pete, part of the fabric of American life. And I'm so grateful for all of you who are joining so that we can have a vibrant, real conversation about national service tonight. So thanks, and I look forward to our conversation.
Senator Coons, Mayor, I want to also introduce and bring into our conversation Moran Banai. She is leading Service Year Alliance's government affairs work and just a leader in the space. And I think really important for us to have her in this conversation. But before I get started, I just wanted to read out a bit of news that you all may not know, or you may already know. The GSA has informed Vice President-elect Joe Biden that they are ready to begin the formal transition process. So all in all, it's a good day and much luck that we're having this conversation on this day that we can actually be talking about this. So let me get started. There's so much happening in the country from the COVID crisis, from everything that we need to bring this country together. We see we're still a divided country. That's what this election has shown us. How do you each see national service as an opportunity to bring this country together? And Mayor, I'll start with you because this was such a big part of everything you talked about. And Senator Coons would love for you to talk about, because this has been a passion you've talked about for a long time. So let me start with you, Mayor.
So to me, it begins with the trust that can be gained by working with somebody else on something hard. I think a lot about my experience in the military, and it's part of what really propelled me to become passionate about all the different kind of opportunities for service, civilian and military, because it's not just the exposure to danger or the being very far away from home or some of the other deep challenges of a wartime deployment that brought us together, although that certainly did. It's part of how I wound up learning to trust my life to people I had, in some cases, just met, or people that I came to learn had very different life experiences and sometimes very different values than I did, but had a deeper shared set of values and a shared identity as Americans and as American service members. But it's not just in wartime or overseas. I think we all know, dating back to our first experiences in school or on an athletic team or in whatever environment it might have been, the cast of a play or even just a neighborhood group of friends, how just being thrust together can create these incredible opportunities to see the world through one another's eyes. And yet many of those circles of belonging that are so important in our lives, they've become more kind of what I call concentric rather than overlapping. In other words, we're more likely to find that all of the different areas we belong are likely to kind of line up with each other and not cut across each other. This is a real problem. This means we're less likely to have shared experiences with people who are radically different from us, people who have a different racial experience, people who have a different geographic experience, people who have a different socioeconomic experience. The more we get sorted into different little buckets as Americans, the less our lives resemble each other, and the less we're even in the same reality when it comes to things like political debate. One of the things I often found as somebody who, as you know, has begun to specialize into going into unlikely and sometimes unfriendly ideological territory on television as well as on the road to make the case for what I believe, is that you're reaching people who actually don't have fundamentally different values than you do. They have largely different information than you do. And there's no way they can even hear you unless you cut across all of that. Service presents this extraordinary way to do it. And while I believe in service opportunities for people of every age, I'm especially excited about what it means if most or all young Americans had that experience as a touchstone. And if you go to certain other countries, Israel is an example, Switzerland is an example, where they do have a universal service experience. It creates this fodder for conversation. And it's true in the US too, in previous times, previous generations when military service was much more widespread. If you look at how people from the World War II generation might strike up a conversation if they didn't know each other, it might well go back to their service experience. What's so exciting about our moment is the awareness that this is just as true of civilian opportunities as it is of being in uniform. And it's part of why I'm an evangelist for what that might represent. Just one last thing I'll mention is having been able to see at moments like when I was swearing in Vista and AmeriCorps volunteers here in South Bend as mayor, you could almost see a team forming before your eyes. And if you talk to them months or years later, you'd find that the bonds they were building through that work were only beginning. So for all of these reasons, at a moment when Americans are finding it harder and harder to even see each other, to even hear each other, I'm not sure that literally coming to a table and talking about our differences, as we sometimes do at Thanksgiving, for example, that may not be as good a way of coming together as having something that we share that's a little bit outside of politics, but is a project that's hard. And that's exactly what happens to the units, the teams, the groups that get opportunities to serve.
Senator Coons, you have been a champion of service since I was in government, even before that. So I've been following everything that you've done on service. How do you see this? I mean, this is such Mayor just talked about it from what he saw. How do you see this? And you were a champion of pushing for the Serve America bill to make sure we could fund it fully. How do you see this playing out in the next, in the next 4 years?
Well, thank you, Sonal. And Pete, I just love listening to you about service. It just, your descriptions of it have a lyrical and a compelling quality. And I just realized how much I miss listening to you on the campaign trail. And I am so hopeful that we will get an opportunity to link arms and really fight for national service as a moment here. And just to be clear about age, I agree with what Pete was saying about the importance of it being an expectation of younger Americans as a part of launching their careers or launching their engagement. But I also think that service has to be available to Americans of all ages. We have fairly robust and long-established senior corps programs, like retired senior volunteer programs. But the AmeriCorps program that I worked in 3 decades ago now, almost 25 years ago, we had members in our corps from college age or early 20s up into their 60s. And that multi-generational composition of our corps, I think really strengthened it and really helped sustain it, particularly because the program that I was working in was about mentoring and tutoring and educational resources and enrichment for kids from very under-resourced and challenged communities. Having people who had themselves been parents and grandparents, who were retired teachers or former teachers, helping encourage and advise relatively young people meant there was more wisdom about parenting and education and learning within our core teams. Let me also just say, if I might, Sonal, that I know this is something that President-elect Biden is quite passionate about, in particular with regards to pandemic recovery and response. We're going to have to vaccinate 300 million Americans. And the testing, tracing, and vaccination challenges of the next 2 years, and the long unaddressed public health challenges that are associated with the opioid epidemic and the ways in which we can and should better connect Americans to health equity opportunities speak to a real opportunity in public health. Access is also something I want to briefly mention. One of the challenges or criticisms of the currently structured national service program is that because the stipend is so low, because the education awards are fairly modest, it has tended to recruit more from those whose families could afford to supplement their income, their housing expenses, their healthcare support for a year or two of national service. It shouldn't be that way. And so a core piece of the CORE Act is increasing the stipend, increasing the education award, funding outreach and recruitment so that a demonstrably more diverse core could be made up of people at different stages in their lives and from different economic backgrounds. My own father was a sergeant in the 1st Infantry, and someone who grew up in Boston as a white Protestant who didn't really know people from other regions of our country, from other ethnic or racial or religious backgrounds. Through my whole life, he said to me, his 2 years as a sergeant responsible for his squad, for his platoon, really made him understand America for the first time, gave him a personal and concrete experience of the reach and range of Americans. And of course, he was serving in an all-male military at the time. My brother and sister-in-law who served in the Army in the modern era had an even more robust experience of the scope and reach of America. I think our military has been a remarkably unifying national service experience. It's past time for us to provide civilian service opportunities that are comparably recruited, trained, supported, and recognized. And the CORE Act would move us a big step in that direction. And using this opportunity, this challenge of the pandemic and the recovery from it as an opportunity to do this is a great moment. And I really look forward to working with Service Year Alliance and with you, Pete, personally, to help advance this goal in Congress.
Well, I want to, Senator Coons, you've listed so many things here. We're going to dig into some of them, and there's lots of questions coming in. So the audience, please do keep sending in questions. We will try to get to them as many as possible. With that, I want to bring in Moran Banai, and I apologize if I said your name wrong again, Moran. So apologies in advance. But please, if you don't mind, just giving us a little bit of your background, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the Service Year Alliance, all the work that you all have been doing. I was lucky enough to benefit from your work when I was in the White House, and just the alliance you bring and the energy you bring on making sure national service is a big part of our conversation.
Well, and thank you so much for having me. I mean, two of our greatest advocates for national service are a part of this discussion, and it's just a privilege to be able to join them. You know, I come to this to national service really from my identity as an immigrant, as someone who whose parents chose to come here and really cemented in me an understanding that American citizenship is a privilege, and with privilege comes responsibility. And so for me, that's been through public service. I worked with veterans, I worked with the military in the Senate, and you can't spend time with people in the military and with military families without really understanding the depth of what it means to serve. And if we can provide that opportunity for every young person, which is what Service Year Alliance wants, then that's an opportunity to really build the kind of civic renewal that we are talking about. Service Year Alliance does essentially everything related to national service except for run programs. So we do policy and advocacy. We run a learning network of impact communities, which are communities across the country who have committed practices. We have a platform called serviceyear.org, which is the first of its kind that connects young Americans with the kinds of opportunities that they might be able to participate in. And we have this program, this campaign called Serve America Together, which is the first of its kind coalition of military and civilian national service organizations coming together to say all types of service should be part of growing up in America. And as part of Serve America Together, we had a presidential call. We asked every candidate to put out a plan for national service. And, you know, Pete stepped up to that challenge, produced an amazing plan. Many of the things we'd love to see, he's already advocated for. So I think between the CORE Act and many of the goals in Pete's plan, you know, that would set us up for the kind of success we want. And the kind of success we want is 1 million young people every year in service, serving their communities, transforming their lives, and putting America back together.
Well, Moran, thank you so much. And I think this is important. I think you talked about young people, Senator Coons, you talked about also asking older Americans to serve. So I want to dig in on one piece that you mentioned. We all talked about COVID is a big issue. COVID is the crisis we're living in right now. It's a health crisis creating an economic crisis. How do you see service playing a role here in COVID? And what do you think we can do, and what do you think the country can do to help join in helping sort of address the COVID crisis? Senator, I'm going to start with you.
Well, Sonal, that's first, one of the real advantages of national service as a way to help deploy up to 100,000 new Americans, not new Americans, but newly engaged in service Americans, is that there is an existing network all over the country. There are commissions for service in every state and territory, and they've got existing capabilities in terms of training, support, partnerships with nonprofits. There are existing model programs around the country that are already doing this, that have been funded by governors and mayors through the CARES Act resources that they got. Some are doing contact tracing. Some are doing outreach from a public health perspective that also connects people to service during this time of COVID-19. And others are preparing for a rapid scale up for vaccination. One of our core challenges is that the CORE Act, or a proposal like it, was not incorporated into an enacted bill because we didn't do a CARES Act 2.0 yet. So I'm hopeful that there is still a possibility of doing that. At the end of the year in the omnibus, there may be a modest increase for the existing AmeriCorps programs, but this is going to take a real push. And so for folks who are listening, who think there really should be a role for national service as opposed to other ways that we could do sort of block grants to state public health departments, reach out to your member of Congress. The CORE Act, CORPS Act, is already endorsed and supported by a broad and bipartisan group in the Senate. But we need your voice, and we need your vocal engagement, because bluntly, there are lots and lots of competing interests for additional federal funding. And the Republican majority in the Senate has resisted the idea of spending any additional dollars in responding to this pandemic. That will be a real challenge.
Moran, I'm going to come to you for a second. Would you mind talking to us about how can people engage? What are you seeing in the Service Year Alliance? What are you seeing in the alliance of members that are there, of people engaging on COVID? How are people engaging?
So the amazing thing about national service is that people are doing everything on the ground right now. It's, you know, it's COVID, it includes contact tracing, it includes public health response, but also all the other challenges that have come up as a result of COVID, right? The learning loss, the food insecurity, the social isolation for older Americans. Young people are already out there really meeting those needs. And if we could pass something like the CORE Act, if we could fund these positions, then we can surge young people into all of these jobs, into all of these service positions, and we can also surge them across the country. One of the challenges is that not every community has access to AmeriCorps. So for us, it's really important to find nimble ways to bring young people into supporting the nonprofits who are on the forefront of this challenge. You know, how do you get one or two young people in these communities really serving as a linchpin? And so something that we've been pushing for is a service year fellowship, which would allow that to happen in addition to the bigger programs that could be scaled up. So that's, you know, that's really important. What we need right now, and we need it across everything, but we need leadership. We need someone at the White House to say to young Americans, I see you. I see that you are leading. I see that you're in the streets fighting for racial equality and that you're way ahead of the rest of us on climate change. And I am providing the opportunities. I want to call you into service to help your country. And if we do that, and we have someone at the White House who oversees this, I call it a service czar. I know people hate czars, but a service czar who can look across the different types of service, someone who has Pete's experience of like knowing how the military operates, knowing how AmeriCorps operates, and can find all of the synergies between them, then that would really elevate national service. And if we can weave it throughout COVID response and recovery, put it into everything that we're doing. FEMA already has a FEMA Corps where young people can be part of disaster response, and a lot of them end up joining FEMA. Imagine if we had that for climate. Imagine if we had that for mentoring and education, for public health. And somebody at the White House was tasked with ensuring that young people are part of the solution. And the beautiful thing about it is I think Senator Coons is a little modest. Getting 18 Republicans and Democrats on a $16.6 billion investment in national service is no small feat. And so when we're thinking about what is actually feasible in this moment, this is a bipartisan solution. It's an effective, efficient solution that is already on the ground meeting needs. So I think there really is an opportunity right now.
Pete, I'm going to bring you in on a slightly different question here, which I think is, I think you have a basis here between what Senator Coons and Moran have offered. People are asking, you know, is service only for young people? Can older Americans participate? How do you see this as you were sort of envisioning and thinking about national service? How can the country participate alongside, both in COVID, you're going to do something on climate change. It seems like we've got so many big challenges in front of us that national service is a way for a lot of people to participate with the government.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the concept of service is that it's really about unlocking what every American has to offer to the country in different ways. And there are so many Americans often of my parents' generation who have an extraordinary wealth of experience, energy, time, and the ability to make a big difference. And so whether we're thinking about people who, to some of the points that Moran and Senator Coons were raising earlier, people who could step in on COVID-related issues, who might have a background in healthcare, or whether we're thinking about the retired educators, of whom we have so many who I think we could be doing a better job as a country of tapping and harnessing what they have to offer. People who have prior experience in some other structured service environment, like Peace Corps, like the military, who might be ready to apply it in new ways. And what's great about, I think, envisioning this as a real kind of sweeping national ethos is that we can devise different ways to encourage and support people as they do it. You know, a lower income 18-year-old who needs both a stipend that allows them to afford to serve and would benefit from things like perhaps tuition benefits is in a different place than a retiree who perhaps still should be compensated for their service, but in a different way. And I think that the more flexible and imaginative we can be, the more we can unlock what different people have to offer. But I've been so thrilled by the number of people who early on, as we were developing this idea of a kind of service year as a norm for young people, saying, hey, what about me? I would be in a hurry to serve. Here's what I would do to help. And I love that. I think that's such a great reflection on the energy and the spirit that Americans have for this, and a huge opportunity that we shouldn't overlook.
Yeah. Senator Coons, how do we get this bill passed? How do we get the money? What's it going to take to make this happen? This is super important. Not only are young Americans interested in participating, older Americans. I think we all now we're all sitting at home. We're like, what can we do? How do we help our communities? How do we get involved? What are ways that we can be doing more? What is it going to take to bring Republicans and Democrats together to get this passed, to make sure we can make the opportunities available and to make this a part of life?
Well, Sonal, thank you for that question. It is wonderfully frustrating how challenging it has been to get this idea that is almost universally embraced as the cure for what ails our nation now in terms of civic division. An answer to the question, how do you earn your way towards a better college opportunity? An answer to the question, how do we provide meaningful skills and engagement opportunities for Americans of all ages and backgrounds? I mean, it is a Swiss Army knife solution. There's nobody against it, but the challenge is of the folks who are for it, we need more engaged and more forceful voices. That's why Service Year Alliance is such a helpful partner. That's why having Mayor Pete really championing this proposal has been so helpful. We have a National Service Caucus in the Senate and the House. But at the end of the day, our challenge has simply been that there are many, many other competing priorities. So everybody on this call, if you'd lift your voice, publish a local editorial, post about it online on social media, talk about it with your mayor, with your governor, make sure that Republicans understand that they have strong and sustained support. There were a few issues with AmeriCorps, and I mean 15 and 20 years ago, and I am struck at how many times they are still brought up in conversations with Republicans, things that have long ago been resolved in terms of operational efficiency, match levels, diversity within the service corps. There's a lot of concerns that I think are long since addressed that are still raised. It is a robust, well-established, well-demonstrated national community that simply deserves to be supersized. I've seen some folks in the chat reference, well, shouldn't it be mandatory? Wouldn't mandatory universal national service be the answer? That is something that a few senior Republican and Democratic senators have talked about in the decade I've been there, but getting consensus around that and getting the financial support for that would be a big leap. Simply increasing, as the CORE Act would do, the number of funded positions to 250,000 a year, I think would be a dramatic improvement. The other thing that we've been doing and that we could use your help in doing is increasing the engagement from employers and from education institutions. So I employ about 50 people, and one of the things that increases the chance you're going to get a job with me is having done national service. I have 5 veterans on my staff, and I have 5 former AmeriCorps members or people who've been engaged in service in other ways. And that combination, I think, speaks loudly. If your state university or the private college or university that you may have attended would give an admission bonus to those who've done a year or 2 of national service, or if the place that you work or the workplace that you lead would make it clear in recruitment that national service will give people an edge. All of this is true for veterans. Veterans get and deserve additional benefits in terms of hiring preferences in the federal government or hiring preferences in many of our largest employers. If one of the first things that happened in a job interview was you got asked, well, how did you spend your year or 2 of service to our nation? You'd begin to weave in this expectation of service into our national culture. So that's just a few suggestions. There's lots of ways we can engage. It is a great idea that is well worth our advocacy, and I'm so grateful for how many folks. There are now over 300 posts in the chat. So I know we can't get to all of them, but I'm really grateful for the enthusiasm and engagement that we're seeing on this exciting conversation about service.
Pete, I see you've unmuted yourself, so I'm gonna bring you in first as a comment on this too, also to keep moving on this.
Yeah, I just want to put an exclamation point on a point the senator made, which is that you don't have to be a senator to be advancing service. If you are influential within any organization, any employer, any school, part of what we've got to do is build a culture that this is expected, or at least that this is rewarded and regarded well. And I think there's a lot more empowerment among people who care about this idea than you might realize. So I'm just so glad he mentioned that, and I hope everyone takes it to heart and uses a little imagination about what you might be able to do to help raise that expectation that that this is really something we're looking out for.
There's one question here, which I think I want to just build on that for a second, which is, can service and national service help us internationally also in terms of how we are perceived internationally and what that means? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no question. I mean, first of all, it's just a way that we can enhance our kind of domestic strength, which is important. And frankly, you know, we've now seen sophisticated hostile efforts to sow division and tear up social trust here at home. One of the best antidotes to that, I'm thinking about, for example, some of these online misinformation campaigns that aren't about directly interfering in our elections, but are actually just about getting us to trust each other less. One of the best antidotes to that is actually not on the international side or on the technology side. It's here at home, finding other ways to build up social fabric so that it's stronger when it gets tugged at in those ways. But of course, the other really compelling thing is to think of the ways that we could be inviting Americans to serve abroad over and above what we already do, or by expanding what we already do. One of the really elegant things about some of what's been worked on so far in Washington that the senator was describing is that it involves a lot of the plumbing, so to speak, that we've already got. You don't have to invent whole new organizations or administrations to do it. We should just fund them more. think of
Yeah.
what it would mean to have just a little more going into the Peace Corps, or if there were a broader service element to something like the National Commercial Service, a really kind of underrated body of people who can offer something professionally and everything in between in all kinds of different international environments. The more people see Americans, not just through media and not just through things like military engagement, but through presence in different countries and around the world, supporting the objectives on the ground, the more I think we have a chance to have a level of global trust that's kind of robust to the ups and downs of our domestic politics, which I think would be a good policy for us to really move toward for the next few decades.
Yeah, it's interesting. We sometimes always get caught up, and Senator Coons knows as well, and as does Moran, on how much it costs to do national service, but we don't actually talk about the benefits of national service and what it means to the country, what it means to bringing a country together, and also our standing in the world when you have a Peace Corps volunteer in a country, what that all means. So I will say I run a program at Georgetown that sends students overseas, and this year they did it virtually. But the connection it creates amongst them is a pretty incredible connection between them and the organizations. Ron, I want to bring you in here a little bit. There's a couple of questions here on the CORE Act itself. So would you mind just giving us sort of the highlights of the act and what's in it?
Sure, and please, Senator Coons, if I forget anything, let me know. So it would expand national service positions for the next 3 years, up to eventually 250,000 positions. Sorry, it would provide higher stipend and benefits, which are really key, as we've been discussing, in terms of actually making national service accessible and an opportunity for all young Americans. It would eliminate taxes on the stipend and on the education award, which other education awards received by Americans aren't taxed. For some reason this is. It was some kind of compromise, I presume, 20 years ago. And that really puts a burden on young people. So those are the main pieces. And the other thing it would do is it would surge these positions towards the kind of responses we need now to COVID. So not just public health, but the other secondary effects of the crisis.
Thank you, Moran, and thank you for the details on that. I think it's important because I think sometimes we don't always understand how much detail is involved in that, and how much work is required to make that happen. You would think 250,000 positions wouldn't be very hard to do, but here we are still today. Senator Coons, there's a very specific question here for you, and I'm just going to read it because I think it's, I don't want to miss the point on this. Senator Coons, you spoke of striving for a more inclusive public service program as individuals can develop their career interests in their educational journey. Is there any way which the educational system can be developed to help teach underprivileged youth about our government system and our public service so they will have this knowledge to have the confidence to pursue their passions? With current high school education, often wealthier Americans, because of their economic status, will have the ability to get ahead through courses such as AP Government and American Politics, which are available disproportionately for the well-off.
That's funny you should mention that. A different bill that I am about to introduce with Senator John Cornyn of Texas would create a new and robust grant program for the teaching of civics in the United States, not just at the college level, not just research organizations, but K through 12. I think all of us can agree that the last few years have made it clear that consensus around what is true and what matters, what is the value of compromise, how is our system designed, demands a greater investment in the teaching of civics and a better understanding of our history, its challenges and its limitations. Whether it's teaching about the civil rights movement, or it's teaching about the history of slavery, or the treatment of indigenous Americans, or the ways in which the suffrage movement or the labor rights movement were critical to defining who we are as a nation today, it's actually a fairly broad and bipartisan bill. There is an underlying bill that we've been working on for over a year that is very broadly bipartisan, that authorizes, it renews an existing program for the teaching of civics, but that program has actually very little money in it. This is a much more robust program that would add real money to it. John and I talked about it today. I was saying to him that I'm excited to introduce it with him, and I'd like to give it some visibility and some lift and some profile. Because honestly, I've met so many Americans who are dispirited, disheartened about the division in our country. They're scratching their head and saying, how could 70 million Americans vote for Donald Trump? You know, look at the options that they had and say, yeah, I want more of this. I want more division. I want more. And frankly, the fact that we are likely to have divided government in the next Congress, although I am still praying for a positive outcome from my perspective in Georgia, I do think re-engaging on access, not just to teaching of civics, but to service experiences. I am persuaded that service learning is powerful, both in terms of the service and the learning. And while that is a core part of the Corporation for National Community Service mission and all the state commissions, the funding for making service learning available, the funding for internships and for civic experiences in under-resourced communities and schools is way below what it should be. So I just want to thank the questioner for that question and the focus on the ways in which experiences, positive experiences with service and with civic engagement have to begin early and really should be a central part of our school curricula and experiences.
And Moran, I'm going to pick up on a comment the Senator made, but also bring you in on a larger question of how do we ensure the diversity of the service movement to make sure, and I know you've been a part of the conversations around this, which is ensuring that people from many backgrounds, not just middle class, but lower income, can also participate and be a part of that. How do you think about it from service here?
Yeah, that's a really important question that we are very committed to. And I think, first of all, it's important to note that there are some really fantastic programs out there that are focused more on opportunity youth or on, on creating an opportunity for young people who are otherwise disconnected from education and employment. And I think sometimes we have a little bit of a skewed vision of who's really going through these programs. That a lot of programs are for people in their own communities, and so they are reflective of their communities. However, there are barriers. You know, if the stipend is basically so low that you have to decide if you're going to take a minimum wage job or do a year of service, you may have to choose a minimum wage job. And that means that you can't invest in yourself and you can't invest in your community. And the outcomes for people who do national service are significantly greater in terms of in terms of employment, in terms of education, in terms of career success. So it's an investment, but it can be hard to make. So it's really got to involve paid opportunities and a stipend that is a livable wage. It's got to have benefits attached to it that are significant. One of the greatest obstacles to national service right now is housing. It's really hard to find housing in expensive markets, and there's no money to do that. So you can only do it in some cases if your parents can help you do it. There's other barriers in terms of childcare and being able to access that. There's like very technical issues about the way AmeriCorps is currently structured that limit the ability to invest more time in the young people who are part of the program and make it harder for programs to choose to invest in in young Americans who might have a harder time finishing the program. So dealing with those kind of technical problems that are actually real obstacles is really important. And another key component is, how do we really make this a workforce development tool, right? Like, young people go into national service and it's a transformational experience in a lot of ways. And one of the ways is that they learn what they can do and they challenge themselves and they get these soft leadership skills, but they also develop a passion for something that they may not have known about. So if we can capture that passion, and so you're doing a mentoring or education core, but you also get the certification so that when you get out, you can continue on to a career. That's true across so many different types of experiences. So if we can build that in, it creates, along with the stipends and the benefits, a real incentive for young people to do the kind of thing that is very transformational, but is out of reach at the moment.
Pete, Moran has sort of a comment in here, and I just want to pick up a thread on this. Is there a way here for unions to work with national service and really thinking about how this is it's not unions or national service, it can be part job training, but it can also be experience, it can be a bit of just bringing the country together. How would you think about that?
Yeah, this is one of the greatest opportunities, and I think something that still needs to be kind of solved or cracked in order to get this right, because there's a sense of maybe competition when actually I see a huge opportunity for mutual reinforcement of these objectives. I mean, after all, you got a lot of, I've been in so many economic development rooms and conversations where people are scratching their heads thinking, what could we do to have more skills training that's not just about going to college? And meanwhile, you got unions doing incredible work in apprenticeship programs and other areas to prepare people for often growing fields where you can make a good living. And they're hurting for recruiting sometimes, or for people to understand the potential. And then in the middle of that, you've got these opportunities around service. So I would love to see us find more ways with organized labor at the table to really shape these programs. Because when you're emerging from one of these programs, you could be that much more suited, especially in terms of some of the soft skills you will have developed, to thrive in an apprenticeship program for a union, as well as being somebody who's more suitable to any kind of employer or educational institution looking for great people. And I think we would be missing an opportunity if we imagine these things in a vacuum without realizing all of the different ways that organized labor is very much in the business of rallying often diverse groups of people around important work to be done, right? And making sure that there's more to an experience of doing a task than that in terms of the relationships that are formed. And that's not only a question of political empowerment, but really of social capital.
Yeah. Senator,
if I could briefly on that, one of the areas where that has long been a part of national service is in home building and construction. Habitat for Humanity was one of the very first national direct AmeriCorps programs decades ago. Youth Build is one of the best established programs. Both of them provide basic sort of introductory carpentry and construction skills. And the challenge is getting that articulated with union apprenticeship programs so that folks who do a year or two of service through Youth Build or who come through Job Corps or who are participants in Habitat then go on to a union apprenticeship and get articulated into a life, into a career. In some ways, this is a challenge of our recruitment and outreach and a challenge of how we compensate through the stipend. There's been downward pressure on the AmeriCorps budget for years, and the increased match requirements and the decreasing or level funding on the stipend and the Ed Award has meant that lots of programs have recruited more among affluent young people whose families can supplement their living stipend rather than having robust outreach, for example, into those returning to society after incarceration, who would be great participants in national service programs, or those who are high school dropouts, which really is what Youth Build is often focused on. This is a powerful model and tool to deliver workforce training, to deliver access to opportunity and education. We just need to invest more in building the connections and sustaining and articulating this work.
So there are so many questions on civics education that I would be remiss to not ask this question to all three of you. But there's a lot of questions here, and I'm trying to read them as fast as they're coming in. On how do we revamp civics education? How do we make sure civics education comes back into the curriculum? Senator Coons, I'm going to ask you this question because you're so much a part of this conversation on this.
Well, look, and to be positive, if I could, one of the things that was exciting to me about the Civics Education Authorization Bill is that it's co-sponsored by an incredibly broad range of senators. I mean, this is Ted Cruz to Elizabeth Warren. And that does say something encouraging about at least elected leaders in our system, that they all think that if people got more education about our system, their perspective would win. If you think about it, you could easily have one side or the other saying, no, no, no. If you learn more about the structure of our system, my side won't win. We have a shared belief in the architecture of our Constitution and in the underlying structure. We just think if young Americans knew more about it, our perspective, our agenda would win. And things like that, things like national service that can bring us together across these challenging and difficult divides are important. I'll also say, and I'm sure this will probably precipitate a lot of commentary. I'm concerned that in schools and on college campuses today, and certainly on cable TV and in the Senate, we demonize each other and we marginalize each other in how we describe those with whom we have significant policy differences. I try to build relationships across the aisle, and I try to speak in a constructive and positive way. Some of the things that have happened in the last few years have strained my otherwise measured and patient style. I am relieved at the GSA ascertainment this evening. But, honestly, if we can't find our way towards each other, we're not going to be able to act on the vision of our civic life that our founders and framers had. But there are ways in which our country and our system remain a work in progress. If anything, this last year has taught us how long unresolved issues of inequality, racial inequality, mistreatment of and disrespect for immigrants, the ways in which Indigenous Americans are marginalized and have been oppressed throughout our history. I mean, all of this is a real challenge. The first thing I did this morning, I was at Dover Air Force Base here in Delaware for a presentation on the state of the base. And I was so impressed with how the colonel, who's in charge of thousands of people on our base, in response to the incidents of early this year when George Floyd was murdered, initiated a base-wide series of engagements and conversations around race and racial inequality. And as I was talking to him afterwards, and I asked about progress and where things stand now, he said, well, the executive order. I said, excuse me? He said, remember, there was an executive order that told us we had to stop doing any training or discussion around critical theory or differences. And I frankly, in the blizzard of things that I have found objectionable about the last year, I'd forgotten that. And there was a silence. He's a serving officer. So I am trying not to engage him in any political topic. And I said, well, let's just be hopeful these conversations can resume. And he said, yes, let's remain hopeful. And then sort of moved on to his day. It is important that we speak of each other and of civics and of engagement respectfully and hopefully. But we also have to recognize ways in which our divisions are unaddressed and unresolved, and we have to speak to them truthfully. So, Sonal, I'm not sure I contributed at all to the conversation, but civics education is a critical part of moving us forward, and we have to remain optimistic and open-hearted about those from both parties and from all perspectives who will participate in that with us.
Well, that was perfect, and we're gonna come up on time, and I know your staff's gonna start texting us to let us know that. So I'm gonna go to Moran for a second before I end with Pete. Moran, give us a little bit of how can this audience help you as you're sort of putting the alliance together as a new administration's coming in, and we can get a bill passed or at least money for the CORE Act.
Well, I think that if you don't live in Washington, D.C., where you don't have a voting member, like some of us, you should be contacting your members of Congress and telling them that the CORE Act is fundamental to securing our country and to solving our problems, and that they should be pushing for it, that they should prioritize it. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that members of Congress really care about what their constituents care about. And so if they're hearing from you that this is a priority, then that's the best way to move this bill forward. So I would do that. And the other pieces, I would just say, like, everything we can do to raise for this new administration, that we also think that this is a big priority. There's an opportunity right now, and nobody knows better than Joe Biden what service means. So just making sure that he knows that there are people who care about national service and would be really happy to see him invest time and energy in it.
Thank you, Moran. Mayor, would love for you to end us off on, again, we started this conversation on why service matters to bring this country together, why it matters even more now. And as you think about this new administration coming in, what is it we can do together to help them?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you again, Sonal. Huge thanks, Moran, for joining us and for the work that you're doing day in and day out with your colleagues at the Service Year Alliance. It's really making a difference. And Senator, we know how much is on your plate right now, so I'm so glad that you were here to rally us on this. And to see just hundreds of people lighting up the chat shows you just how much appetite there is for the things we can do around service. And I think that's reflected across the country. So this is a moment. It may take a while to fully build up the head of steam that's going to be required to deliver service at the scale we all imagine. That's exactly why now is a good moment to be pushing and growing. Talk to friends about it. Look at some of the resources that have been mentioned in the chat. Keep an eye on these pieces of legislation. And remember that this is not just a question of policy, but of culture. And the more we talk to people that we know and ensure that there's a level of social and material reward for expressing interest in service in all contexts and for all generations, the better we're going to be able to meet these goals. This is a huge opportunity, and it could be a generational project to deliver it at full scale. But that's just the kind of thing that I think this community of supporters is up for. And I'm really excited for where the conversation is going to go from here.
Moran, Senator Coons, Pete, thank you for this conversation. To our audience, thank you all for joining us. This is such an important series of conversations. Please join in on the series, because this is just the beginning of a series of conversations. This is important for our country as we all come together. And this is going to be even more important post the election, not just up to the election. But this is really where the hard work begins. So thank you all for joining us. And thanks for taking your time tonight.
Thank you.